Morning rain in Seoul came softly, threading the air with a mist that blurred the edges of the city. It was the kind of rain that never really fell. It just hung there, clinging to windows, eyelashes, and the sighs of the people hurrying beneath their umbrellas. Dr. Stella Mensah stood by the window of the clinic, her hands still gloved, her breath fogging the glass. Behind her, the muffled chaos of the refugee ward hummed, the shuffle of nurses, the muted cries of children, and the steady rhythm of heart monitors. It had been 6 months since she arrived in Korea, 6 months since she'd left behind the red dust and sunlight of Lagos, trading it for steel-gray skies and a foreign language she still struggled to pronounce. But the clinic had become her anchor. Every morning, she tied her braids, buttoned her white coat, and told herself that healing others might one day heal her too. Dr. Stella, a soft voice called behind her. It was Nurse Min, her young Korean assistant, barely 25 and always smiling, even when exhausted. The CEO is visiting today. Stella turned. The CEO? Min nodded eagerly. Yes, Kang Jae-Hyun. He's the one whose company funds this clinic. He doesn't come often, but when he does, she trailed off, eyes gleaming with something between admiration and fear. Everyone behaves like he owns the air. Stella smiled faintly. Then I should probably remember to breathe. Min giggled. Just don't look directly at him too long. People say his stare can freeze time. Stella raised a brow, amused. Is that a warning or a challenge? Before Min could reply, the sound of engines outside caught their attention. A line of sleek black cars stopped in front of the clinic, and men in dark suits stepped out, holding umbrellas. Through the rain-streaked window, Stella saw him. Kang Jae-Hyun moved with the stillness of someone used to being obeyed. He was tall, his features sharp in that quiet, deliberate way that made people look twice. Even through the glass, there was something magnetic about him. Not beauty exactly, but command. He entered the clinic, his presence pulling the air taut. The staff bowed. Cameras clicked discreetly. But Stella didn't bow, not out of defiance, but because she didn't know she was supposed to. He noticed. Their eyes met across the ward, his dark and unreadable, hers curious but calm. Something flickered between them, fleeting as lightning in fog. Then he was beside her, surrounded by aides, nodding at introductions. Dr. Stella Mensah, the clinic director said. She's the lead physician for the children's unit. From Nigeria. Jae-Hyun's gaze lingered. You speak Korean? Enough to know when I'm being talked about, she said lightly. A faint smile touched his lips, the kind of smile that barely existed. Then that makes 2 of us. He walked with her through the wards, asking few questions, but watching everything. Her movements, her patience, the way she comforted a crying child in halting Korean. When she wasn't looking, his eyes softened, though no one in the room would have believed it possible. As they stopped by a boy with a broken leg, Stella crouched, fixing the boy's blanket. Does it hurt? She asked gently. The boy nodded. A little, but Appa said pain makes us strong. Appa is wise, she smiled. But sometimes it's okay to say you're tired too. When she stood again, Jae-Hyun was watching her, really watching, as if trying to understand something unspoken. Do you always talk to patients that way? He asked. That way. Like they matter. She blinked, caught off guard. They do matter. He didn't reply, only looked away, expression unreadable. That evening, after the entourage left, the clinic seemed to exhale. Min was breathless. He spoke to you, she whispered. He never talks to anyone, not even the director. Stella shrugged, hiding her unease. Maybe he was being polite. But when she returned to her office, she found something unexpected, a single white chrysanthemum on her desk, still wet from the rain. No note, no explanation. She stared at it for a long moment. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless, and somewhere in the city, Kang Jae-Hyun sat in his car, watching the same gray sky, wondering why a stranger's voice in a refugee clinic wouldn't leave his mind. Days passed. The chrysanthemum dried, but she didn't throw it away. Work filled her hours, treating burns, infections, malnutrition, but her thoughts kept drifting. Sometimes she glanced toward the clinic gate, as if expecting the black cars again. And then one evening he came back. No cameras this time. No guards. Just him, in a dark coat, holding an umbrella. "You're working late," he said quietly, stepping into the ward. She didn't hide her surprise. "I could say the same, Mr. Kang." He looked around. Hospitals smell the same everywhere: antiseptic, fear, and hope. She tilted her head. "You sound like someone who's been in too many." "I have." His tone darkened, the edges of something personal. "My mother died in one." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, then changed the subject. "You're far from home." "So are you," she countered gently. His mouth quirked. "Seoul isn't home. It's a battlefield with better lighting." That made her laugh, the sound warm, real. For a moment, he seemed caught in it, as if he hadn't heard laughter like that in a long time. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. "This. Treat people who have nothing to give you." She met his gaze steadily. "Because they remind me that I still have something to give." He stared at her a moment longer, then looked away. "You're a strange woman, Dr. Stella." "Thank you," she said, smiling. "I take that as a compliment." He looked at her again, really looked, and something changed in his eyes. The distance between them, though full of unsaid things, felt suddenly alive. When he left, she stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the rain. She didn't know why her heart was beating too fast, and he didn't know why he couldn't stop looking back. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her voice haunted him, calm yet fierce, like someone who'd fought too hard to believe in softness again. He poured himself a drink, staring out over the glittering sprawl of Seoul. He'd built an empire from nothing, mastered boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But one woman in a worn white coat had unmade his composure in a single day. He tried to tell himself it was curiosity. It wasn't. It was the beginning of something that frightened him more than failure ever had. In the clinic, Stella sat by the window writing patient notes. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Dr. Stella Mensah?" The voice was low, familiar. "Kang Jae-Hyun," she said quietly. A pause. "I wanted to thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like." She smiled faintly. "You don't sound like a man who forgets easily." "Until now, I didn't think I could." Silence. Then, softly, "Would you have dinner with me?" Her heart skipped, and she almost said no. Almost. But something inside whispered yes. "All right," she said finally. "But only if you promise not to bring your guards." He laughed, a real laugh this time, deep and unexpected. "You have my word." And when she hung up, the rain had stopped, and Seoul, for the first time in weeks, looked almost like home. The city shimmered beneath neon light as night fell over Seoul. Rain had returned, soft and rhythmic, painting silver streaks across the streets and the curved glass of the restaurant windows. Dr. Stella Mensah stood outside Hanol, one of the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurants. Her simple black dress clung lightly to her shoulders, modest but elegant. She didn't usually dress up for anyone, least of all for men who owned skyscrapers, yet tonight she had. She told herself it was curiosity. Just curiosity. The maitre d' led her through a room that gleamed with quiet luxury, crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, and the hum of polite conversation. When she reached the far end, she saw him. Kang Jae-Hyun rose from his seat as she approached. No suit today, just a dark turtleneck and coat, simple yet impossibly refined. "You came," he said. "You invited," she replied softly. A smile ghosted across his face as he pulled out her chair. "You look different outside the clinic." "So do you," she said, taking her seat. "Less terrifying." He chuckled, low and genuine. "I'll take that as progress." They ordered wine, his choice, something aged and warm, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, only charged. The city lights flickered below them like scattered stars. Finally, Jae-Hyun broke it. "You're not like anyone I've met." "That could mean many things," Stella said carefully. It does, he admitted. Most people speak to me like I'm a headline. You speak to me like I'm human. She smiled faintly. Maybe because I spend my days reminding people they're human too. He looked at her, thoughtful. And who reminds you? Her gaze faltered. No one needs to. I've learned to do it myself. There was a story behind those words. He could feel it, the echo of something that hurt to touch. But he didn't press. Dinner came, quiet, elegant plates neither of them cared much about. They talked instead. About Lagos and Seoul, about childhood, about the strange, restless loneliness of people who never quite belonged anywhere. He told her about growing up under a father who thought emotions were a flaw. She told him about losing her fiancé during a cholera outbreak 3 years ago. I stopped believing love was meant for people like me, she said, staring at her glass. He didn't answer, only reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. The touch was light, fleeting, but it carried more warmth than any word could. Maybe love finds people who stopped looking for it, he said quietly. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, the rain, the music, the city, all of it disappeared. After dinner, he insisted on driving her home. Don't tell me you walk from Gangnam to Mapo in the rain, he said when she protested. She smiled. Doctors are resourceful. And CEOs are stubborn, he countered. The car glided through the slick streets, the city glowing through the fog. Neither spoke for a while. The air between them felt fragile, too full to name. Why did you come to Korea? He asked eventually. She hesitated. Because I needed to start over. I lost too much back home. My work, it's all I had left. He nodded slowly. I understand that. She turned to him. Do you? His jaw tightened. I built everything I have from nothing. Every company, every deal, all because I couldn't stand losing again. My brother died when we were children. I was supposed to watch him. I didn't. The confession came out like broken glass, quiet, raw, unexpected. I'm sorry, she said softly. He looked out the window. Don't be. It made me who I am. She studied him, the shadow behind the confidence, the pain behind the precision. He was a man shaped by loss, just as she was. Different worlds, same scars. The car stopped in front of her small apartment. Thank you for the ride, she said gently. Thank you for not pretending to be impressed, he replied. She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. You underestimate yourself, Mr. Kang. And you overestimate people, he said, but his voice held no bite. Before she stepped out, he added softly, May I see you again? She hesitated, her hand on the door. That depends. On what? On whether you're looking for company or something real. He met her gaze, unflinching. I don't waste time with illusions. And then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. Something real, then. She nodded, then stepped out into the rain. He watched her walk up the narrow street, her figure disappearing into the soft glow of the streetlights. He didn't drive away until she was gone. Weeks passed. Their meetings became quieter, less about grandeur, and more about familiarity. Sometimes they met at the clinic, a brief coffee in the hallway, a smile exchanged over patient charts. Other times he'd appear at the park near her apartment, both of them sitting on a bench, sharing roasted chestnuts like two people who'd forgotten the world expected them to be anything else. He'd tell her stories about his business empire, the weight of expectations, the endless masks. She'd tell him about her patients, the little victories that kept her going. And slowly, what began as curiosity grew into something neither of them could name. One evening, he found her in the clinic's children's ward, sitting beside a girl with pneumonia. She was reading aloud from a picture book in halting Korean, the child giggling softly between coughs. He watched from the doorway, something in his chest tightening. When the girl fell asleep, Stella looked up, surprised to see him. You shouldn't sneak up on people, she said, smiling. I wasn't sneaking, he said. I was watching. That's worse, she teased. He stepped closer, voice quiet. You make this place feel alive. She tilted her head. And you make it possible. For a moment, they stood close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath. His hand moved, almost unconsciously, brushing a strand of her braid from her face. She froze. So did he. Neither spoke. Then the sound of footsteps in the hall broke the moment. He stepped back. "You should rest," he said softly. "So should you," she whispered. He left before she could say anything else. But that night, she dreamed of him, of rain, of city lights, of the way his voice had softened when he said her name. The next morning, Seoul woke to headlines. Kang Jae-Hyun scandal. Investigation into JH Corporation's funds. The news spread fast. The clinic staff whispered. Donors withdrew support. Stella found him in his office that evening, the skyline burning orange behind him. He looked up as she entered, exhaustion etched into his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Then why did you let me in?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Is it true?"
Some of it.
"Not the part that matters." "What does that mean?" He exhaled slowly. "A rival company fabricated documents. It's politics, but the damage is done." "Then fight it." He gave a hollow laugh. "I always do." She studied him, the man who'd built walls around everything he cared about. "You don't have to do it alone." His eyes met hers, tired, guarded, but grateful. "People always say that," he murmured. "Then they leave when it gets hard." She reached out, touching his hand. "I'm not people, Jae-Hyun." Something broke in his gaze, the first crack in years of control. He turned his hand, fingers brushing hers, holding for a heartbeat longer than necessary. And in that silent exchange, in that simple act of staying, something real was born. A week later, the scandal escalated. Cameras swarmed his company. The clinic faced funding cuts. And through it all, Stella stayed. Sometimes she'd bring him coffee late at night, sitting with him in his office while he pored over files. Sometimes they said nothing, just shared the silence. "Why are you doing this?" he asked one night. She smiled softly. "Because I know what it's like to have no one believe in you." He looked at her then, truly looked, and the wall between them finally fell. He rose, crossing the room in 2 strides, his hand finding her cheek. "Stella," he breathed. She didn't move, only closed her eyes as he leaned closer. Their lips met, slow, hesitant, like a question they'd both been afraid to ask. The world outside faded. The rain, the city, the chaos. There was only this moment, fragile, necessary, real. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "This changes everything," he whispered. "Maybe it changes nothing," she replied softly. "Maybe it just makes everything honest." He smiled faintly. "You make honesty sound dangerous." "It usually is." They laughed, quietly, tenderly, as the night hummed around them. And though both knew the storm was far from over, for the first time, neither felt alone beneath the Seoul sky. The Seoul skyline glittered like 1,000 restless thoughts. From Jae-Hyun's penthouse office, the city looked untouchable, carved in light and distance. But inside, everything was unraveling. Stacks of reports lay open on his desk. The air smelled of coffee gone cold. His phone buzzed endlessly, reporters, shareholders, his father's lawyer. The scandal had become a living thing, whispering through every corridor of his empire. Then the door opened. "Mr. Kang, she's here," said his secretary. Jae-Hyun straightened his tie, a reflex, not pride. "Send her in." Stella stepped through, her white coat still on. She looked out of place in that world of marble and glass, yet more real than anything inside it. "You haven't eaten," she said simply, holding up a paper bag. "You forget things when you're angry." He almost smiled. "You're very direct for a doctor." "I'm very tired for a human being," she said, setting the food down.
Eat.
He obeyed because somehow when she spoke he did. For a moment, the office felt less like a fortress and more like a room with air in it. Outside, the world was less kind. The tabloids had found their story. Nigerian doctor linked to Korean CEO in charity scandal. Mystery woman behind Kang Jae-Hyun's downfall. The photographs were grainy, taken from a distance, her walking beside him, her hand brushing his sleeve, the faint curve of a smile. By morning, they were everywhere. At the clinic, whispers followed her like shadows. Some patients avoided her. A donor withdrew. The director called her in. "We're under pressure," he said awkwardly. "Until the investigation clears, perhaps it's best if you take some leave." "Leave," she repeated quietly. "It's temporary," he insisted. "You've done nothing wrong, but the board." She didn't let him finish. She walked out before her voice could break. That evening, rain blurred the windows of Jae-Hyun's apartment. He stood alone until the intercom rang. "Dr. Stella Mensah to see you," the guard said. He didn't hesitate. "Let her in." Moments later, she stood in his doorway, soaked to the bone, trembling, not from cold, but from something heavier. "They suspended me," she said. His expression hardened. "Because of me." "Because of the headlines," she corrected softly. "But yes, because of you." He cursed under his breath, pacing. "I'll handle it. I'll call the board, the press." "No," she cut him off. "You can't fix this the way you fix everything else. This isn't a transaction." He stopped, meeting her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing." Her voice broke a little. "I just needed you to know." He crossed the room, his hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have come alone. The press." "I don't care about the press," she cried. "I cared about the clinic, about the people we helped. And now it's gone." Her voice faltered, and before she could turn away, he pulled her into his arms. At first, she resisted, pride, fear, grief, but then she let go. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Later, they sat on the couch, a small lamp burning between them. She wore one of his shirts, too large, sleeves rolled. Her wet clothes hung near the heater. "Do you ever regret building what you built?" she asked quietly. He thought for a long moment. "Every day. But I wouldn't know who I am without it." "And if you lost it?" He looked at her, the question cutting too close. "Then I'd have to start over. Like you did." Her smile was sad. "Starting over isn't bravery. It's survival." He reached for her hand. "You make it sound the same." She met his gaze, tired, warm, certain. "Maybe it is." Outside, thunder rolled. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move. "I should go," she whispered. "You should stay," he murmured. Their eyes met, the kind of look that doesn't ask permission. For a heartbeat, the world was silent except for the rain against the glass. He kissed her, slow, deliberate, filled with the ache of all the things they couldn't say. When they finally pulled apart, the rain had softened to mist. "Nothing about this will be easy," she said. "I stopped believing in easy a long time ago," he replied. Days turned to weeks. The investigation deepened. The clinic remained closed, but in the small hours of the night, they found their own refuge, stolen moments that felt like truth. They cooked simple meals in his quiet apartment. She taught him fragments of Yoruba, words for laughter, for home. He taught her how to write her name in Hangul. They made promises without saying the words. But the city was listening. Paparazzi followed, business allies whispered, and his father, Chairman Kang, summoned him. The elder Kang's study was a shrine of power, mahogany, calligraphy scrolls, and silence heavy as judgment. "She is not one of us," his father said. "She's a doctor." Jae-Hyun answered evenly. "A good one." "She is a problem," came the reply. "Your company bleeds, your name burns in the press, and you stand here defending a foreigner who will never be accepted in our world." Jae-Hyun's hands clenched. "Maybe I don't want this world." His father's eyes flashed. "Then you will have nothing." For the first time in years, Jae-Hyun's voice rose. "Then nothing is honest." That night, he didn't call Stella. He couldn't. He drove aimlessly through the city, rain streaking the windshield, the echo of his father's words gnawing at him. When he finally reached her apartment, it was nearly midnight. She opened the door before he knocked, as if she'd known he was coming. "What happened?" she asked. He couldn't answer. He just sank onto the couch, hands shaking, and she sat beside him, silent. After a while, he whispered, "He wants me to end it, to let you go." Her chest tightened. "And what do you want?" "I want you to stay." He looked up, eyes raw. But I don't know how to protect you from this. You don't have to protect me, she said softly. Just don't hide me. He closed his eyes, as if that truth hurt and healed at once. A few days later, the press caught them leaving a small cafe hand in hand. The photo went viral in hours. Supporters called it love beyond borders. Critics called it shameful. The board called it unacceptable. By evening, he was forced to resign as CEO. When he told her, she only said one thing. You're free now. He smiled sadly. Freedom feels like falling. Then fall, she whispered. I'll catch you. Weeks passed. The company replaced him. The clinic reopened under a new sponsor. They lived quietly, far from the city center. An apartment with no marble, no boardrooms, just light and peace. One evening, she returned home to find him on the balcony, staring at the sunset. You miss it, she said gently. Some days, he admitted. But not tonight. Why not tonight? He turned, his eyes softening. Because tonight, I'm where I'm supposed to be. She crossed to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about what people will say? He smiled faintly. Let them talk. They've always needed stories to make sense of what they fear. The sky burned gold and then faded into twilight. Below, the city pulsed, relentless, alive. And though they both knew storms would come again, new whispers, new pain, for now, there was calm. Two hearts, one rhythm, beneath the same Seoul sky. The autumn wind swept through Seoul like memory, cold, clear, and impossible to hold. From their small balcony in Mapo, Stella watched the city lights flicker against the dusk. Jae-Hyun was late again. She told herself it was nothing. Just another meeting, another errand. But lately, he'd been quieter, his gaze distant even when his hand found hers across the table. When he finally came home, the door clicked open softly. He looked exhausted, rain caught in his hair. Long day, she asked. Long month, he admitted. He set down his briefcase and crossed to her. You waited up. I always do. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. There's something I need to tell you. Her heart tightened. What is it? I received an offer. He hesitated. A company in London wants me to lead a new project. International development. Renewable investments. It's everything I thought I wanted before all this. Stella didn't move. And now? I don't know, he whispered. It would mean starting again. Clearing my name on a global stage. How long? 2 years. The silence stretched. She forced a smile. You should go. His head snapped up. What? You should take it, Jae-Hyun. You fought too hard to stop now. He stepped closer, searching her face. And what about us? She looked away. I became someone's shadow once before. I can't do that again. But I'll wait if you ask me to. He reached for her hand. You shouldn't have to wait for anyone. Maybe not, she said softly. But I would. He drew her into his arms, holding her as if the world might steal her away. I'll come back, he murmured. No matter how far. She closed her eyes. Then I'll be here, under the same sky. The days before his departure passed quietly. They didn't speak much about London or about time. They just lived, cooking together, walking along the Han River, pretending that the ticking clock wasn't real. On his last evening, they went to the clinic, the place where everything had begun. The wards were empty, lights dimmed. Do you ever think we were supposed to meet? He asked, standing by the window where they'd first spoken months ago. She smiled. I think we were supposed to save each other, even if only for a little while. He turned, taking her face in his hands. That's not little. That's everything. When he kissed her, it wasn't like before. It wasn't discovery. It was promise. The kind that carried both hope and pain. They stood that way until the lights went out, and the night folded around them like memory. Weeks later, the flat felt emptier than she expected. His scent lingered in the books, his laughter in the walls. Every morning, she made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then poured one down the sink. Letters came, handwritten, thick paper that smelled faintly of sea and ink. My dearest Stella, London is grey, but not like Seoul. Here, even the rain feels different, polite, reserved. I miss the noise of your city, your laughter, the way you say my name like it means something more than syllables. Work consumes me, but in quiet moments I find myself tracing your handwriting on old notes just to feel close again.
Jay.
She replied every week, her words filled with gentle longing and quiet strength. Jae-Hyun. I keep busy. The clinic grows. The children remember you as the man with the warm eyes, though you deny it. The city has changed, but the river hasn't. I visit it sometimes, and imagine you there beside me. Don't lose yourself in the noise. Come home when the sky calls you back.
S.
Months turned to a year. Then 2. Their love stretched across oceans, steady, patient, but heavy with the weight of time. Sometimes they spoke on video calls, voices overlapping across time zones. He'd show her the London skyline. She'd show him the clinic's new wing. They'd laugh, they'd fall silent, and somewhere between laughter and silence, love lived quietly. But distance, like gravity, pulls even the strongest stars apart. One winter night, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. Dr. Stella Mensah? Yes. This is Minji from the embassy. Mr. Kang has been hospitalized. He collapsed during a conference. They said you're his emergency contact. Her world tilted. London was colder than she imagined, the kind of cold that sank into bones. She found him pale against the hospital sheets, machines humming softly. He opened his eyes when she spoke his name. You came. You didn't give me much choice, she said, voice trembling between anger and relief. He smiled weakly. Some habits die hard. What happened? Stress. Overwork. The usual. I guess the universe wanted me to slow down. She took his hand. You scared me. I scare myself sometimes, he whispered. They sat in silence, the hum of monitors filling the space. You shouldn't have come, he said after a while. She frowned. Why not? Because I didn't want you to see me like this weak.
She squeezed his hand.
You forget I'm a doctor. Weakness is where I begin. He laughed softly, then winced. You always know how to make pain sound poetic. She brushed a tear from his cheek. And you always make love sound complicated. For 3 weeks, she stayed by his side. She met his colleagues, cooked his meals, read to him when he couldn't sleep. Slowly, color returned to his face. One evening, they sat by the window, London's rain painting soft trails down the glass. Do you ever regret coming here? He asked. No, she said. Because it brought me back to you. He looked at her for a long moment. When I thought I might die, I wasn't afraid. I was angry that I never told you properly how much you changed me. You just did, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Then I can rest. But she shook her head. Not yet. You owe me a walk by the Han River. By spring, he was discharged. They returned to Seoul quietly, no reporters this time, just 2 people trying to find their rhythm again. The city had changed, but the sky hadn't. They moved into a small house near the edge of Namsan, with a view of the tower lights flickering at night. She reopened her work at the clinic. He began teaching business ethics at a university, a slower life, one built on truth. Sometimes, when the evening breeze carried the scent of rain, they'd sit together on the porch, saying nothing. You ever think about London? She asked once. Only when it rains, he said. That's when I remember what it felt like to lose you, and what it meant to find you again. She smiled, leaning against him. Maybe that's what love really is, finding the same person over and over, no matter how far apart you drift. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I'll spend the rest of my life finding you. Years later, when the clinic expanded into a full hospital, she placed a plaque at the entrance. In gratitude to those who teach us that healing and love are not so different. Visitors often asked who it was dedicated to. She never said. But sometimes, when the rain began to fall softly over Seoul, she'd look up and whisper his name, knowing that love, the real kind, never needed explanation. Seoul had changed again. The skyline had grown taller, brighter, the streets busier. Yet in the quiet pocket of Namsan where Stella and Jae-Hyun lived, time moved slowly, like it respected them too much to rush. On mornings when mist curled along the rooftops, Stella would wake before dawn, just to listen to the city breathe. She still worked at the clinic, now head of its medical outreach. Jae-Hyun, ever the restless soul, lectured at the university, mentoring students who reminded him of the man he once was: ambitious, hungry, and a little lost. Every day, they found new ways to meet in the middle, her world of healing, his world of rebuilding. But time, gentle as it was, had begun to leave its trace. He noticed it first, the faint silver at her temples, when she laughed in the sunlight. She noticed it next, the way he rubbed his chest sometimes when he was tired, as if trying to calm a memory that wouldn't fade. They didn't talk about it. Love had long stopped needing words. One evening in late spring, they hosted a small dinner at home for the clinic staff and a few of Jae-Hyun's students. The house was full of laughter, glasses clinking, the smell of sesame and ginger in the air. As Stella moved between the guests, her hand brushed Jae-Hyun's shoulder. He looked up at her, smiling, that same quiet smile from years ago. "Still can't stay out of the kitchen, can you?" he teased. She raised a brow. "And let you burn the rice again?" The table burst into laughter, and for a brief moment, they were young again, the doctor and the CEO, still teasing each other across the lines of duty and destiny. Later, when the last guest had left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, she found him standing on the balcony, staring out at the glittering city. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "That I used to look at the city and only see numbers, profits, percentages, potential. Now I look at it and see stories.
People.
You." She smiled softly. "You've changed." "So have you," he said. "You used to talk about leaving. Now you talk about planting roots." She leaned against the railing. "Maybe I just found something worth staying for." He took her hand. "Stella, if something ever happens to me—" "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Not tonight. I just want to know you'll keep living. Keep healing." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I've already survived the hardest thing, losing you once. I won't survive it twice." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll try not to make you." Weeks turned to months. The air thickened with summer's weight. The clinic thrived. Her name began appearing in medical journals. Jae-Hyun's lectures drew hundreds. They were, by every measure, happy. But happiness, she'd learned, often carried a shadow. One humid afternoon, as she waited outside the university for him to finish a talk, she saw him stumble slightly on the steps. Students rushed forward, catching his arm. By the time she reached him, his breathing was shallow, face pale. "Hyun," she called, voice sharp with fear. He smiled weakly. "Guess I overdid it again." They rushed to the hospital, the same one where he once built a new wing years ago. The doctors were kind, efficient. The diagnosis was not kind. Cardiac fatigue. Chronic strain. Not fatal, they said, but it meant slowing down. Changing everything. That night, back home, Stella sat by his bedside, holding his hand. "You promised me a walk by the Han every spring," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep it. Just a little slower this time." Autumn returned. The maple trees along the river turned crimson. True to his word, Jae-Hyun walked beside her, slower now, his hand resting lightly on her arm. They didn't talk about illness or time or the things that waited beyond. They just walked, step by step, as the leaves fell around them. "I used to think love was fire," he said suddenly. "Bright, consuming, impossible to sustain. And now—" He looked at her. "Now I think it's water. It moves, it wears down stone, but it never disappears. Even when it looks still, it's alive underneath." She smiled through the tears she didn't bother hiding. "That's beautiful." "It's you," he said simply. Winter was gentle that year. Snow dusted their balcony, soft as breath. They spent most days indoors, reading old letters, watching the world blur into white. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, she woke to find him watching her. Couldn't sleep, she murmured. He smiled. Didn't want to. She reached for his hand under the blanket. You're thinking too much again. He chuckled softly. Always. I was thinking about the first day I saw you. That stubborn doctor who wouldn't let anyone walk past a crying child. She laughed quietly. And you. The CEO pretending not to care but standing in the rain anyway. Maybe I was waiting for you even then. She traced her fingers along his palm. And maybe I was meant to find you here, so far from home, yet right where I belonged. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. If I don't wake up tomorrow. Jae-Hyun. Listen, he said, voice barely a whisper. If I don't promise me you'll keep walking.
Keep helping people.
That's how you'll love me, by living. She felt the warmth of his breath, fragile and human. You're not leaving me tonight. He smiled faintly. I'll try not to.
He didn't.
Not that night. Not that winter. Time, like love, decided to be merciful. By spring, he was stronger. They celebrated the hospital's 10th anniversary, hand in hand, as the city bloomed again. When the staff toasted them, to love that heals, as one nurse said, Stella looked at him and realized something profound. Love wasn't the beginning of their story. It was the thread that held every ending together. One evening, long after the guests had gone, they sat on the porch, watching the lights shimmer over the city. Do you ever regret anything? She asked softly. He thought for a long moment. Only the days I wasted before I met you. And now? Now, he said, every moment feels borrowed and blessed. She leaned against him. When the end comes, I'll find you again. Maybe in another city. Another lifetime. He smiled. Under the same sky? She nodded. Always. That night, when she dreamed, she saw them again, the younger versions of themselves, standing in the rain outside the clinic. She saw his hand reaching for hers, his smile, the city lights behind him. And she understood, at last, what it meant for love to endure despite pain. It wasn't about promises or forever. It was about choosing each other, every day, even when tomorrow was uncertain. When she woke, he was still beside her, breathing slow and steady. She closed her eyes again and whispered, "Thank you for staying." The years passed quietly, as if the world itself learned to whisper around them. By the time Stella turned 60, Seoul was almost unrecognizable, sleek towers of glass reaching higher than clouds, self-driving cars humming past the old market streets. But some things refused to change. The clinic still stood by the Han River, its walls filled with children's laughter. And at dusk, when the sky bruised into shades of violet, a soft light still glowed from the small house on the hill near Namsan, their home. Jae-Hyun's hair had turned silver, his eyes lined with years of kindness and exhaustion. He moved slower now, but his voice remained steady, warm. The same voice that had once turned boardrooms silent and now softened the edges of her world. Stella's hands trembled sometimes when she stitched wounds, but her heart never lost its steady rhythm. She still taught at the hospital, still smiled at every new volunteer who reminded her of the woman she used to be, idealistic, fierce, unbroken by time. They had grown old gently, together, like two trees leaning toward each other through every season. One morning, the sunlight fell pale and thin through the curtains. Jae-Hyun sat by the window, reading an old book. Stella poured tea, her movements slow and practiced. He glanced up, smiling. "You're still making it too strong." She handed him the cup. "And you're still complaining about it after 40 years. He laughed, setting the book aside. "I suppose we're both consistent." She sat beside him, watching the city wake below. "Do you miss it?"
What?
"The noise. The chaos. The life you used to have." He thought for a moment.
Sometimes.
"But only because it led me to you." She smiled faintly. "You always know how to say the right thing." He chuckled. "No, I just had a good teacher." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence only two people who have shared everything can hold, the silence of peace, of gratitude, of a love that has outlasted all storms. Later that afternoon, they visited the hospital for its annual founders ceremony. Children waved, calling her Halmione Stella, Grandma Stella, as she passed. The new doctors greeted them with reverence, and the staff smiled knowingly. Everyone in that building knew their story. At the ceremony, the hospital's director, one of Stella's former students, took the stage. He gestured toward the couple sitting in the front row. "Today we celebrate not just a hospital, but the love that built it," he said. "When I was a boy, Dr. Mensah treated my mother. When I grew older, I learned that her partner, Mr. Kang, once risked everything to keep this place alive. Their story reminds us that love, in all its forms, heals what medicine cannot." Applause rippled through the hall. Stella blinked back tears. Jae-Hyun took her hand, squeezing gently. When they returned home, she stood by the porch, looking out at the fading skyline. "You know," she said, voice quiet, "I used to think my story began in Nigeria. But maybe it began the day I met you, in that broken camp, with dust in the air and hope hanging by a thread." He smiled. "And I used to think my story ended when I lost everything. But then you walked into it, and suddenly the ending became a beginning." She turned to him. "Jae-Hyun, are you happy?" He looked at her for a long time. Beyond words. The next morning was colder than usual. When Stella woke, the sun had just begun to rise, painting the curtains gold. The air felt too still. She reached out instinctively, her hand finding his warm but unmoving. For a long moment, she just stared, her breath caught in her throat. Then she leaned closer. His face was peaceful. There was no fear, no struggle, only quiet, as if he had simply fallen asleep while watching the dawn. Her tears came slowly, silently, falling onto his hand. "Jae-Hyun," she whispered, "you kept your promise. You stayed." Outside, the first cherry blossoms of the season drifted through the air. They buried him under the cherry tree behind their home, the same one they'd planted together on their 10th anniversary. The petals fell like snow, soft and fragrant, covering the ground in a pink haze. At the funeral, people came from everywhere: students, doctors, refugees, businessmen. All of them had a story about how he'd changed their lives. But Stella didn't speak. She stood quietly, her hands folded, eyes lifted to the sky. Later, when the guests had gone, she sat by his grave, a small wooden box in her lap, the one that held all his letters. She opened it, took out the last one he'd written before his heart had begun to fail again. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "My dearest Stella, if you're reading this, it means I've finally done what I always feared. Left you waiting once more. But know this, I never really left. You live in every breath I take, every sunrise I'll never see. You once told me love was about finding each other again, no matter how far apart we drift. So when the wind brushes your hair or the rain falls softly on your hands, that's me, still trying to find you. Under the same sky. Jae-Hyun." She pressed the paper to her lips, eyes glistening. "Then find me soon," she whispered, "because I'll be waiting." The years that followed were quiet, filled with purpose. She continued her work at the hospital, mentoring young doctors, funding scholarships in his name. When reporters asked about the founder's legacy, she always said the same thing. "He taught me that love and healing aren't so different. Both require faith, and both leave scars that turn into light." As her steps slowed and her hair silvered completely, she found herself spending more time by the cherry tree, reading aloud from the old letters. Sometimes, she swore she could feel him beside her, not as memory, but presence. One evening, many springs later, the blossoms fell again. The sky burned orange, then faded to violet. She sat under the tree, breathing in the scent of petals and rain. When she closed her eyes, the world grew soft, and in that stillness, she felt it. A warmth, a whisper. "Stella." Her eyes fluttered open. And there he was, young again, standing at the edge of the garden, his white shirt glowing in the dusk. He smiled that same smile that had undone her heart a lifetime ago. "You took your time," she said, tears glimmering as she rose. I promised I'd find you. And I promised I'd wait. He reached out his hand. She took it. The cherry blossoms swirled around them like snow. The wind lifted, carrying their laughter across the garden. Soft, fleeting, eternal. When morning came, the nurses found her sitting peacefully beneath the cherry tree, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the rising sun. The petals had fallen around her like a gentle shroud. Beside her lay an open letter, the ink smudged by dew.
It read,
Love endures despite pain. And beneath the same soul sky, it never ends. Epilogue. Every spring, the cherry tree behind the old house blooms brighter than any other in the neighborhood. The neighbors say that if you stand beneath it at dusk, you can hear faint laughter, a man and a woman, intertwined like wind and river, whispering to each other in the language of forever. And when the petals fall, they drift across the garden toward the Han River, carrying with them the story of two souls who met, lost, and found each other again. Beneath the soul sky. Cherry blossom.